Hey everyone, Alex Italander here, and before we dive into the next Behind the Ostium, I just wanted to take a moment to tell you about our Ostium Season 6 Indiegogo campaign. Thanks to the Ostium Patreon, we're able to pay Team Ostium for their work, whether it's voice acting, sound design, editing, or artwork. With our Indiegogo campaign, our goal is to pay our whole team fairly, and you can help make that happen in two ways. One, by supporting the campaign. There are a variety of awards, from sticker packs to postcards to notebooks to signed copies of the Ostium book, and access to a brand new miniseries just for the campaign. And two, by sharing the Indiegogo link with friends, family, and through your social media and telling everyone about this campaign and why you want it to succeed. You can find the link in the show notes to this episode or by going to indiegogo.com and searching for Ostium Podcast. You can also find it on our social media pages. Okay, that's enough of me. Thanks for your help, and let's get on with the new Behind the Ostium. So here we are again with another Behind the Ostium, and this time we're starting off our world building series. Don't know how long it's going to be yet. Hopefully nice and long and lots of fun episodes. So we're just going to start off with Dwayne and I just talking a little bit about kind of an introduction for world building and when we first started kind of discovering and thinking about it. So Dwayne, why don't you start off by where you were first introduced and exposed to world building?
Sure. So the idea of world building first came about around role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. We started playing, and we were new, we were young, so we were using the pre-built modules that they would provide. And from there, we started to build our own adventures within those worlds. Mm-hmm. And as we got older and a little bit more adventurous, we started then, well, why don't we play games in our own worlds that we've manufactured?
So when you started doing your own ones, were you scripting them too, like writing them down, or when you were using kind of off the module, but then kind of making your own ones off of them? Or
yeah, and it was usually the role of the dungeon master to build those things. The right. Characters, we would allow the characters to dictate, obviously what went on in the game, and we would provide like the NPCs or the towns, that they would have access to.
Okay. So there was some input from everyone then, which is kind of cool. Yeah. And then, so then you started making your own separate ones? Is that all
correct?
Together, or?
Yeah. So we decided that, instead of, playing within these pre-built worlds, we were going to build our own. We were in, if anyone's familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, the Forgotten Realms, there are some very well-known characters, in those worlds. So we wanted to be those characters. So we were building our own worlds, where we could have a mage or a fighter that would have the renown of the ones that you would have read about in the novels from those books.
Right. And then did you go further into making your own separate stories, like separate completely from the world of D&D and Forgotten Realms and stuff? Or
much later, yeah. When I got more interested in, I would call it more like cyberpunk type of RPGs. I believe it was called Dark Conspiracy. It was set in the nearish future, maybe the early 2100s, but technology had advanced, but so had corporations. The corporations ruled everything. And then there was a bit of a Lovecraftian element to the game as well, where things from other dimensions were seeping in and trying to take over. And we played one module from that world, and from there we just started building our own. It was really open-ended, and I'm like, all right, the area that we live in northeastern Pennsylvania was pretty much wasteland by the maps of the game. So instead of that, I made this area more of one of the mega metropolises of that future. But it was still right on the edge of the wasteland, so we had access to both areas. And we had a lot of fun with that. It was kind of Professor Xavier's school for children here, with some of our characters, but yeah, we had a lot of fun with that.
Do you still have the I don't know, was the notes you took or whatever still hanging around?
I'm sure I still have something somewhere on a hard drive. Yeah, there was a lot
disk,
of
right?
probably a 3.5. Yeah, there was a lot of note taking, and I remember hand drawing a lot of maps.
Oh, cool.
Um,
And then were you influenced by some writers as well too in world building?
yeah, of course. I'm definitely more of a sci-fi fan. Than fantasy, but I've read a lot of both. So like my favorite sci-fi author is Robert Heinlein. Some of his books are very I guess it's described as they draw you in. You find yourself in a setting, and he describes it so well that it's not like you're reading the book anymore. He's really painting the picture for your mind.
Part of it.
Yeah, just like, some of the other big sci-fi authors that I like Ray Bradbury is another one for that, where you're just reading along and there's a movie going on in your mind while you're reading the book. Arthur C. Clarke was another one. He's a little bit more technical. In my opinion, he
hard sci-fi,
very hard sci-fi, and I guess rightly so, because he was involved in creating a lot of real-world technology as well.
Yeah, right.
But then I do like Lovecraft. I think it's not the horror aspect of the Lovecraft, but more of the surreal aspect of the Lovecraft.
And how varied everything is, and weird, and just you never know what you're gonna get.
Right, it's like where are these things coming from? Why do they even exist? And all of his stories deal with madness in some way or another, and how the things that go on in his stories can be some of them can be so mundane, but they drive people to literal madness. So that's what I think I enjoy about Lovecraft. And I know probably each one of those authors that I read, or I just listed there, have some real issues because of the time they lived in, and, with their writing style, and, being very misogynistic, some of them.
I think Bradbury so much, though. He was pretty great.
Yeah, probably not so much He was more current, but even Heinlein.
Heinlein definitely got a little sexist, and yeah.
Yeah, he definitely had some stories where there were strong female characters, but there was always that male character that you're like, why did he even need that character? But
I definitely felt like with the one I've read of Asimov too, his characters feel very kind of simple and almost one-dimensional, robotic, like they're prop pieces for the story he's trying to tell and set up.
And that's true. He does write a lot about robots, though. So
right. I did get to meet Bradbury once, actually, because he came back when I was at Long Beach State. He was doing a reading there, and my wife's a huge fan of his, and she was doing actually the lighting in the theater for that. So we kind of had like a first date then to go see him, and got to meet him and everything, which was pretty cool. Yeah,
that's awesome.
He was still doing like readings and signings around LA into his late 80s. Yeah, impressive guy.
That's great.
Anything else you feel influenced you with world building? You can say no.
The fantasy aspect does come in with things like the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Even though I'm almost ashamed to say I did not read the Lord of the Rings until probably within the past 3 years. I had read The Hobbit in high school.
But you saw the movies, right?
Sure, and nothing like the book, but yeah, I enjoyed the movies, of course. I still don't understand why the Hobbit needed to be 3, but hey,
money. I'm making it money still.
Of course.
That's why.
And I think to people that haven't read the Hobbit, seeing the movies, they don't know that. Wow, the Hobbit was a really short book. How did they make 3 movies out of it?
I think I watched the first movie in the theaters and was disgusted, and that was all I did.
Oh, really? Once I saw the first one, I'm like, well, now I got to find out what he does with the rest.
To find out what happens with that damn orc that he keeps bringing back, even though it wasn't in the book.
I think they call that hate watching. I'm not sure.
Punishment. But I guess in its own way, he was world building off of
Exactly,
you
and
know,
and I
adding
suppose
that to itself.
any writer, even screenplay, you're going to take some artistic license to build the story that you think is going to make money.
And as Stephen King says, you know, they can, when they do an adaptation, they can change it however they want and make it completely different, and you can hate it, but ultimately that book is still on that shelf unchanged there, so you can always pick it up and read it the way you want it anytime you want.
Exactly, and I feel that way when I see an adaptation of something that I really love, and it's not done well. I'm like, well, at least in my mind, it's still the best. You know,
Right.
I don't immediately take to Twitter and just start bashing. You know, it's like, hey, I didn't care for it. You know, but the book is always still my go-to for most things. I was just trying to think of what movie was better than a book and I can't really think of one. I'm sure somebody has an opinion, but
I'll have to think about that for a while. For sure there's one or two, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. And Game of Thrones is kind of neck and neck now, really, for what they did, movie versus book and stuff. Yeah, for me, being exposed to world building, it was a pretty similar thing. A lot with reading. I read. I kind of didn't get started into reading until I was a young teenager, and then just started gobbling everything up. Started Stephen King, did Lord of the Rings, and a lot of epic sci-fi and fantasy, and just being exposed to how big and complex a world can be, and then especially when you're reading a series, seeing how it's not just one standalone thing, that how you could keep a story going along, and how you introduce details and facets of the world that you can then talk about and discuss in further books along in the series. I did some D&D in college too, and we had a friend who was usually the DM, who did his own totally made up story about, it was like a kind of future Mars type mission where we went to Mars and stuff like that. It was called Rockets and Ray Guns, but a kind of like homage to the pulpy classics, and stuff like that. But again, he made it all up himself, and it was a very cool story to be involved in and stuff. So that definitely, I think, had a bit of an influence on me. And then in my own writing, as I began starting with short stories and then eventually moving on to longer things, novels, and then finally series, just learning from scratch how long an idea could be propelled and expanded upon and developed to become a book and then possibly a series, and how you world build that. I can still remember my first novel, in air quotes, that I wrote, which was, I wrote it on an electric typewriter, and it was like 50 pages, which in my mind was really long, but of course wasn't really that long at all. And all I remember was it being about a haunted house that also involved an alien abduction somehow. and just, even though it was, a little first effort by myself, looking back on it now, it was a learning experience in knowing how what I thought was long really wasn't that much at all to even make a, quarter of a novel or whatever, and how much you really do have to develop a world fully and fill in a lot of details and complexities, even if it doesn't show up in your story, your short story, or your novel, your first novel that you're doing off of that world. You still have to put all this framework and structure in there to be able to write a full story out of it, because otherwise then you're just going to run out of material and realize you don't have enough. And that's kind of how when I started with Ostium, how I wanted to do this. Where I wanted to start with a simple idea, but as the story started to get moving and it developed, and I started finding my way of where I was going through these doors, leading to different places, and then learning more about Ostium, the town itself, I knew in the back of my mind, as this was starting to grow as a little story, I was going to have to develop it more and more, the framework and structure around the world of Ostium, to be able to make it a bigger thing, which I was kind of doing in the back of my mind as I was writing, but also as I was working during the day and just kind of world building in my head. I tend with my schedule to do writing at night when I can, but during work I'm able to, because I'm a mail carrier and I drive all day doing mail, which I can kind of do in my sleep at this point because I've done it for so long, and I'm listening to audiobooks and podcasts. But in the back of my mind, I'm usually writing in some way, in that I'm plotting or developing or coming up with my ideas. The mind just basically just keeps running whether I want it to or not. So it works out to be a really good way to kind of develop a world build separate almost from having to do my writing at night, which works that way.